Apamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at apamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody awake? Half awake? Before we begin, I wanted to recommend this book that I've been reading, Belonging. It's by social psychologist Geoffrey Cohen. It's really quite wonderful. So I've been really appreciating the research that he's done and the work that he's done about this experience of belonging and how we help people have a sense of belonging and how that develops in us. So I highly recommend it. My book recommendation of the day. It's Friday. And for those of us who are here, unfortunately not those of you online, there is the invitation to breakfast tacos following our morning sitting, which we customarily do over at Cherrywood. So please join us if you can. Okay. So today I'm going to kind of wrap things up a little bit. Tomorrow, Kim will be doing the Dharma talk and Dharma activity. So this is my last shot at you. And today I want to wrap up some of the connections between spiral dynamics, this sense of belonging, and Appamada. But first I want to say a little something about the, I sent out handouts. The handout I'm about to give you, which is just a way of understanding how the Spiral Dynamics organization came to do assessments to help people understand what their particular mix is, right? And they did this development with, at the time that I took it, over 5,000 people. And they not only had them take the assessments, but they interviewed their families, their colleagues, to see how accurate the assessment was at revealing sort of what the values of the person were as they were understood both by the person themselves and by the people around them. Does that make sense? So they're very scrupulous in terms of their research. This isn't something that they just brainstormed about.
So can I just ask, so the assessment was a self-assessment and it was just verified by the individual?
No, it's an actual online assessment that you take. It's an assessment tool.
The individual test?
Yes.
It's not the family and colleagues that are.
They don't take the assessment. No, the researchers went out and interviewed those folks.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And just to try and calibrate the assessment so that they could fine tune it and get it to be accurate. So what I sent out, in the interest of transparency, I'm going to show you mine so we can talk through it and you can see what how it looks and how fine-grained it is. So for you.
And is the idea that it persists or it doesn't change throughout your life, or is that a snapshot in time?
It's a snapshot in time, but it's fairly stable. So they won't talk about child development, of course, but in adults, it's fairly stable unless there is some circumstance, change in the life conditions, or something that precipitates a change. The one thing that can precipitate a change without there being a crisis in the environment, they know for sure, or some crisis in their relationships, is meditation. And that does tend to have transformative effects. So that's one of the things they discovered. So this assessment shows that we are not one thing, right? So there's representations of all the different levels in this handout, which is this handout. And so what it shows, you'll notice there's a zero like equator on it. And what it shows is both your resonance with and your aversion to a particular level's values. So So you can see, and it starts with purple level, which, when they actually give you this assessment, they've organized for reasons known only to themselves, not good information architecture, but they've organized all of the expressed self levels on one side and all of the sacrifice self levels on the other side, so these are all mixed up. So I've redrawn it so that it follows the sequence that we have discussed. So you can see, there's zero attachment to purple or red or blue, and some aversion, actually, so to those levels, right? Then start to get into orange. There's a little bit of a, resonance with orange, but mostly not so much. Green starts, you can see there's a kind of a progression in a way. There's a, more resonance with green, mild amount of aversion to green.
Excuse me, would the aversion be to people who are in that level?
No, it's just, you're not attracted to that set of values.
Okay.
That they're not the values you're operating from. Yeah.
What kind of questions would lead you to discover or to disclose that you are, that you have this relationship to orange type of thinking? Is there a question?
I don't remember the exact questions, but they would be questions about, they'd be like, I enjoy creating new things or new ideas, and I like to measure their success or something like that. It would be some kind of question like that, but it's not quite so overt. Those questions are very subtle, and you would never, I'm an assessment expert. I spent many, many years studying assessment. I can game most assessments, but this one I had no clue about. So I had no clue what any of these questions would mean. I hadn't studied spiral dynamics yet, and I had no, they were just random questions as far as I was concerned. So then you can see a yellow. Now there's like zero aversion to yellow values, and a kind of interest, resonance with those values. But turquoise this is where I broke the assessment, because their original ceiling was at 60. So this is at 89. So they hadn't really ever assessed anybody that high, but they had all the questions that it had just never come up that high. So their little charts only went up to 60. It really made me laugh. So this is shows you that in every individual, there's this mix of some positive resonance with something, some negative resonance with something, with these different levels. That makes sense? So that's what I liked about that assessment model. It wasn't like, oh, you're a green, it was really about, you have a strong affiliation with these values. You have a kind of a negative association with these values. Does that make sense? Yeah.
This may be an out of place question, but I'm wondering, so these are values that you orient toward, but you don't necessarily operate with.
You don't
Is
necessarily
that
operate
correct?
from, right?
You don't necessarily.
Yeah, you don't necessarily operate from them. So in this case, for example, orange, I could go into an orange level organization, understand exactly what their goals were and how they were measuring things. They have metrics, they have ways of, determining your success, and I would know how to do that. But it would not be my preferred place to be. Does that make sense? Yeah. And there'd be a part of me that would be struggling because I have a little bit more aversion to that. It's not even that set of values, it's that way of organizing values. It's like not how I would organize values, right? So my quote, measure of success wouldn't look like the metrics they were using. For example, you're in a sales organization where it's all about the numbers, right? How much sale. But a true salesman, it's all about the relationships. So, there's a green level heart in the middle of them,
I guess I was thinking more in terms of your values, have to do with, or they're kind of what you aspire to, okay? but then your conditioning involves lots of barriers, so you aren't always operating
That's right.
in a way that is,
Your deepest, as we would say, inmost
so
request.
it doesn't mean that's how you're operating, it means it's what you value.
Yes, it's not what you value, it's how your values are organized.
Okay.
So you value family. If your values are organized in a green level way, then it'll all be about the family being inclusive, and all the neighborhood kids will be coming over and after school and they'll be hanging out at your house because you have that green level organization of family. Blue level organization of family, there's a commander-in-chief, there's all the, recruits.
Oh, I see.
So there's a second in
Not what,
command.
but how.
It's how, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So
I
when
know you
people
said
tell you
that.
that they value family, you don't know what that means. They may be
Right.
telling you they value family and they beat their kids so that they will obey, like that's how they value family. And it's a different way of holding that value.
So like a yellow level that values family would look different in terms.
Totally different, it's like,
Yeah.
people come and go, we've got a kid who's having a year abroad, we've got, sometimes we move around, dad has different jobs, there's a fluidity to it, we're not wedded to a place or a house or, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah, so when you're saying, I value family, that doesn't actually mean anything, right?
Right.
It's how you hold it, what you're doing with that value. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, does a person go through these stages? Like, would you have gone through a purple stage? Or is a person sort of born green? I mean,
Well, it's really interesting because what I saw with my students is I saw progression over the years that I was teaching. So in the beginning, my students were strong, a bell curve, you have some at different levels. The strongest level would have been blue and orange equally. So people coming, I had some students coming from small towns in Texas where, it was all about, that kind of blue level order and hierarchy was what was important. I had some more entrepreneurial and, so it was that, but I saw movement first towards green and then towards yellow. By the end of my teaching, I was seeing a few kids at turquoise. Yeah, so I think in terms of what you're born as a, in beige level because it's just basic survival, you're a baby, you just gotta get fed, so it's just like, it's like that, but there's a way in which you can see, if you look back, I can see that I went through some of these stages faster than other stages, but I did go through them. So I went through a entrepreneurial stage when we had the landscape business in Wisconsin, went through a green level stage, and each of these stages you can kind of see, I did evolve through that in some way. And so sometimes you can notice that. But it's not simplistic, obviously. And also some of these, I think a person can go through a stage in a minute like that if the conditions are such that that's what's required, and if they have the capacity.
It also seems like regardless of how your own values are organized, that the expression or how you sort of behave in the expression would be very much a function of the environment you're in.
Absolutely.
So. Because
that's the key to survive and thrive, right? Is the fit with the environment. So, if you're in a solidly blue level environment, you want to thrive in that environment. You're not going to come along with your green level values and say, let's all hold hands, it's like, oh, I see we have this structure here and there's a person and there's a chain of command, I know where I am, Yeah, that's the advantage, I think, that Graves was talking about of the higher levels of, development, is that you have that capacity. Because
operate within whatever.
Yeah, to match the environment. Yeah, so anyway, for whatever that's worth. So,
One comment on that, so you could match the environment because you're trying to survive, although you know you have turquoise
right,
aspirations, but you're in a blue environment, so you,
right.
okay.
So you can follow the rules, you can obey the chain of command, you can send memos up through the, you can do all of that, but your core values are still held in a turquoise way. So probably what you will be doing is looking for possibilities for creating spaciousness and openness in that blue level hierarchy, right? Just to open things just a little bit, moments, you're not trying to be a revolutionary, you're just really like trying to provide that turquoise level quality in what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which is very hard.
Of course,
And that's where that change model comes in.
that's where the change model comes in. Exactly,
Looking at, like, that organization, where they're at. on that
exactly.
change model.
Yeah, exactly. So, so this is, this is just background. And the second handout I'm gonna give you, I'll just briefly touch on, I'm not gonna go into it, but this is another part of the assessment where you write a little bit about questions, this I believe about friendship, this I believe about our way of life. This is so you'll know, I did this in 2008. Flint and I had just actually moved in together. Flint had just moved into the little back house. It was in the middle of this training, spiral dynamics, ironically enough, that the tornado took the top of the house off. And so when I went in the next morning, I was talking to my insurance agent on the phone on my drive out there to the crossings, and and they said, so did anybody have anything interesting that they did last night? And I said, well, something probably relevant. So anyway, this is just for you to have, so you'll have some idea of my way of thinking anyway, about these questions. Because I think it's important to know what your leadership is thinking. Okay, so we don't have to go over that, but you'll have it so that you know. This is part of that assessment. There's one other part, I can't remember what, there are 3 parts altogether, 3 assessments that come out. So I had all my students do it, and then they would talk about it with each other, and talk about what does that look like, what is it, and do they feel it's accurate? And they were pretty convinced it was very accurate, but more so that it helped them with their relatives, because they could understand better where their relatives were coming from. And they could survive and thrive in that family environment, where relatives were holding their values in very different ways. So that was, it was very fun to work through those assessments with them, and they learned a lot doing it. So anyway, so that's that.
Question, Peg, did you find that the students or yourself also moved along the flex, the order, the first order change, second order change, and the preferring order and chaos? Did people move along that as well?
Well, we just did a snapshot, so I don't know.
Ah, okay.
This is just a snapshot of a moment in time,
Got it.
And so, so they felt that it matched where they were.
Right.
But I don't know what their situation would be later. Did they become more flexible? Did they, I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but they felt it was a pretty accurate representation of where they were, of their preference of order, preference, and the nice thing about it is none of this is pejorative, like if you prefer more chaos and less order, that's just a snapshot of what your preferences are. It doesn't make you a better person or a worse person, or it'd be better if you preferred more order, or, there's no value judgments associated with the assessment itself. It's just like, this is just a snapshot. Does that make sense? Yeah. Other than, as I said, Graves pointing out that there is a slight preference for higher orders that can then fit more environments, like when the existential conditions change, they're better equipped to deal with that. So, yeah. Okay, and it is, it's possible to drop down levels if the life conditions change. It's also possible, to move, but it's not gonna be probably a lot of movement across a lifetime. Yeah, you're not gonna go 4 levels or something like that, that's what they understood anyway. Okay. We wanted to talk about this 4th column. Now I say I don't have, of our, okay, hold on a second, I gotta go. Of the map that we had of the life conditions, the biopsychosocial capacities. So you had asked about a little bit more clarification about Sangha in that 4th column and the evolution of Sangha. Right? So obviously, we don't see beige level Sanghas, right? This is like a proto, people not even gathering yet at beige level. And remember, the existential external life conditions meet our individual and collective biopsychosocial potential. So there has to be a group potential as well as an individual potential. If we're going to talk about Sangha, there has to be a potential there for people to develop and to meet the life conditions of the Sangha, right? It's existential questions. Okay, so those the life conditions of the individual may be quite different from that is the existential conditions for an individual may be quite different from the larger social conditions. So for example, someone who loses their job in the middle of a booming economy, right? Their existential life conditions are suddenly quite different from the larger social conditions that are around them. Does that make sense? So that's just something to remember. An organization may operate with green level values in the midst of a competitive culture, right? So it might not be, usually there are these different strands in the culture and they're operating at the same time, like there's some red level, as we know, there's some purple level. The superstitions of pitchers are a good example of, sort of purple level thinking that somehow if they have a chicken bone in their sock or whatever, they're pitch a perfect no-hitter. So the strands are there in the culture, present in the culture. So it's not like it's not a monolithic thing. It's not like a green, but there will be, like the bell curve, what predominates, and it'll be precipitated by existential changes. So we're in the middle of existential changes right now. And so that's impacting the levels of society that are dominant at a given time, that are prevalent at a given time. The others are always all still there, but they become more backgrounded. Does that make sense? So we're, now we're more, I think, you can see the influence of yellow level, right? Technology has brought a lot of yellow level effects into the culture. People sort of rootless in a way, right? And it's all about flux and flow and freedom. So work from home or in the office, or both, there's that sense of people requiring that freedom. So that's we're moving into that where that's more dominant. As you can imagine, this causes enormous stresses on blue level institutions where these yellow level people are supposedly operating, right? And even with green level, it's like, well, these yellow level people don't seem to have any commitment to the community. No, they don't, so there's this, but there's a sense of, oh, this whole curve is moving that way, right? You can see that whole curve is moving that way. And that's what Graves thought too, And he was, he was very modest. He said, at best, I'm a blue level person, my values are at blue level at best. And yet, I thought his path-breaking research was so innovative that, he easily could be an orange level value holder, but he wouldn't have claimed that. Anyway, but this is why transcend and include is so important, because we can see this with this shift, these other levels of holding values, if they're dismissed or demeaned, they can cause a lot of trouble in the society, right? This is what we have. That's why we have problems with red level right now, which is prone to, anger, grievance, rage, and violence. Because it senses something slipping away. It senses that something's been taken away from them, and the only way they can imagine to recover it is with the red level strategies, right? So when you understand that, you see, of course, and there's tensions in the blue level institutions, like, churches are, struggling, really struggling. And corporations that are trying to maintain a hierarchical structure are really struggling. And so everything's sort of moving away from that. Even something like ATMs and banking, because yellow level people want to have money wherever they go. They're Puerto Rico or, Argentina, they want access to their money, But banks used to be actually literally a concrete institution you went to. And, and so there's this stress, like trying to provide for what is needed in a population that is rapidly shifting its direction. The coming crises that the population is facing, existential crises, mean that a new order of thinking is going to be required if the civilization is going to survive. And that's obvious to almost everybody who's alive right now, right? That next order of thinking has to be a shift that we're able to make on a large scale. Now, of course, some people are not going to be able to make that shift but the sort of dominant operating system of the culture will have to make that shift. Okay, so you don't evolve out of stages of development any more than you develop out of your childhood conditioning, your teenage rebellion, the confusion of your 20s. You're just operating at a different level. You have a different way of operating, right? You're not operating like a teenager. You're not operating like a toddler. But that's why we can talk to a toddler, a teenager, or a young adult, right? Because those things haven't been completely swept away. We still have that capacity, right? So as our lives become, we may not want to return to living in those levels. I think about my 20s and I think, yeah, I would not do that again. But as our lives become wiser and richer, we can appreciate what each level contributes, so. Okay, so the collective development in sanghas. As I said, we don't usually see sanghas at beige level. Could be when they're really, like a couple of them went to beige level when they completely lost out during the pandemic. They couldn't afford the real estate that they were meeting in. And, so they basic survival was something they were dropped down to, and some of them didn't make it. I say here that the spiritual group focuses on basic survival, finding a place to meet, trying to meet basic expenses in order to survive. There isn't yet any doctrine or social structure. We can't focus on that yet. We just have to try and survive somehow. Then this purple level structure of values, the group recognizes or forms around a wise elder of some kind. They might develop priests or gurus as the holders of the wisdom of our connection with a magical nature, a nature that seems magical. And it organizes itself around rituals and wisdom teaching. So you want to satisfy those the spirits of nature, right? So the organization itself it's very I would say, not yet institutional, you know, it's very, very much just a kind of a band that is gathering around, and you see this out there now, you know, there are teachers of all kinds, you know, Reiki or whatever, they have their little band that is around them absorbing their wisdom, right? Does that make sense?
I think of the fire worshipers
Yeah,
that the Buddha talked
that the Buddha talked to, yeah.
Specifically connection with nature through fire, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, and that's when he gave the fire sermon. All is burning, eyes are burning, you know, and so it was very prescient. You know, I gave that talk to the city council when I was invited to do the prayer in the morning. And I said, you know, here we are in Austin, you know, all is burning. They weren't really thrilled with that talk. However, it was factual. So anyway, there develops a sort of trove of stories, legends, myths, that they're all associated with purple level. And so in the community, there's this sharing of the lore that's being developed. And that kind of also then a kind of reverence for leaders and who have that wisdom. And then the wisdom that's been handed down from generation to generation, usually about the tides, about the phases of the moon, when the fishing is good, and that kind of thing. So there's this kind of follow the ancestral ways and the wisdom of the elders, and ritual emerges. So ritual brings the group together, and that's the sort of proto-formation of some spiritual community. But then along comes red, and this is where it's really about power. Red is really about strength and power, vitality. And so there are possibly, I don't know of personally, but there possibly are some whole collectives that are like this, whole groups that are like this. I don't know of any that are sanghas, you know. And there's a sense in which you can hardly really call it a community, because it's just a competitive band, you know. There's a strong, powerful leader, and then there's competition for the favor of the leader and whatever spoils that leader is going to, provide for you. And it's all about loyalty. Loyalty is the key thing holding that group together. Loyalty to the leader, not to each other, to the leader, because there's a lot of competition in it, and striving. And it's the place where shame becomes a factor. So you're riding for glory, and the alternative is, if you fail, it's shame, right? So that's where these start to come online, and you can see that strand then gets woven into the next levels, right? So you can see shame becomes really a factor in blue level, for example. So in a blue level collective, spirituality becomes religion, I said. Like, this is where you have institutional structure. The way you get red level transformed to blue level is there's an even more powerful being at the top, even stronger than your leader. And it's someone who can give you, hellfire forever after life. So there's this creation of this heaven and hell, which is the ways that that the obedient are rewarded or the disobedient are punished. Because very much it's at blue level, it's quite binary. So there's good and evil, there's right and wrong. You're in the community or you're out of the community. So being expelled is a big deal in that structure, because you're out in the wilderness then with nothing to protect you. Nothing to protect you from red, nothing to protect you from the forces of nature. You're just, really vulnerable. So it becomes imperative for people to have their place in that structure. This is where you have, for example, the burning of witches, and that kind of sense of evil must be rooted out. And And so that, and in the hierarchical structure, then it's whether there are cardinals and bishops and the Pope, or whether it's, there's a lieutenant captain, lieutenant commander, captain, admiral, and then the head of all of the armed forces, the president. So these are the people at the top are to be absolutely obeyed, but they're obeyed within this structure. And it's usually very, very clear what's right and what's wrong and what the rules are. So people feel safe. And what they feel safe from, you have to remember, is what they've come from, red level energy, which is a kind of chaos. So they want order, they want stability. They're willing to sacrifice themselves for the order and the stability of that structure. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but that becomes kind of confining, and we all know organizations like this where it just feels, you think, wow, it's just so confining. You just have to, put your head down and follow the rules and hope for a promotion or, whatever. So that's when this creative energy starts to break free, right? And this is what you have in orange. And in terms of sanghas, this is where people are, I would say, where Lay Teachers Association started, for example, like we've got to get free from this Japanese hierarchical model so that we can freely explore the Dharma in this way, right? So, there's lots of innovation. In our case, we, developed this integrated intensive concept, and inquiry was part of that, even though inquiry is ancient, but offering it in a Zen setting was not. And so those innovations are intended to help the community be successful. Just help the community be successful. And how do we know whether the community is successful? How do we know? At orange level.
Metrics.
Metrics, exactly. Is the congregation growing? As that's an essential element of orange level. Is the congregation, are our contributions increasing? We can see all of these things we can see on a chart, right? They're all things that can be mapped on a chart. Is that wrong or bad? No, that's a necessary part of our business model, but you see, so there are organizations, there are congregations, there are sanghas for whom that becomes the dominating concern and not a part of their function. Does that make sense? Where all they can think about is, are we losing contributions? Are we gaining members? And this is why we don't have members, because there's no metric you can associate with them. People ask me, how big is Appamada? I'm like, oh God, how would I even know that? I have no idea. People come, they go, it's very fluid, and they're like, well, but no, like how many members do you have? We don't have memberships. And they're like, well, how do you know how many people you have? And I'm like, that's something we don't know. And that, for someone who has orange level values, that doesn't even compute. Like they can't even, they're like, no, they keep saying, but how many people do you have on the email list? Like they're just looking for some orange level metric, right? Which we don't use for that. So there's a kind of entrepreneurialism that happens at this level with organizations and this concern with metrics. And also sort of adopting cultural trends and fads. Do we have karaoke night, which they do in Japan, in the Zen temples, they have karaoke night. And church, and also this sense of church, or whatever it is that we're doing, as a place for people to make connections that will advance their material success. And so, in almost every, how to succeed book, it'll say, go to church and, network in your church, and build it's a good way to build your business. And that's that function, right? You're laughing.
Wondering what my dad would think when he was a pastor or networking at church.
Yeah, but it's a commonplace, it's just a commonplace.
Hi, Peg. Can we go back to blue for a second? Because what I was thinking about was, it seems like when the organizational part supersedes the teachings, that's when we have, like the Catholic Church, I'm thinking, since I grew up Catholic. you know,
Right.
that the church kind of ruined Christianity in a way.
Well, what happened was not wrong. I mean, they wanted to preserve the teachings. They needed some kind of a vessel to preserve the teachings. They didn't trust humans. So they created a structure, right? So but the problem is that then people became attached to the structure and to kind of building the structure, to maintaining the structure, and the structure became the focus of attention and energy over the teachings, right? And so there's still, of course, offering the teachings, but so much of the energy and attention of the community is devoted to the preserving the structure, including often the physical structure, but also this hierarchical structure and this is why, like the Catholic Church acquired a lot of real estate in Europe in order to protect and preserve that structure, not because that would advance the teachings of Jesus, right? So that's the problem exactly that you identify, Rosemary, that people then with some kind of other kind of leaning, they feel, like I'm just spending all my time on these boards and committees and, I don't, what happened to my spirituality? It's all become kind of, just a support for this structure. Yeah.
And another one, going back, you said something about when there's demeaning of former stages or something like, and I missed that sentence. Could you?
Then this creates conflict and tension. So there's resentment, there's grievance, there's rage and fury. There's a sense of losing something, which they are, which is the center of the stage, right? Or the focus of people's attention. And they will get it back whatever way they can, right? So they use the strategies known to them at that level. So from red level, it's going to be force. It's going to be energy and force. That's how you're going to try and recover what they call, philosophical terms, the dominant narrative, the narrative that shapes the culture. So
what was the demeaning part? That's the part that what was demeaning what?
Well, when someone at another level, or in fact, like a group or a society is demeaning of that level, yeah.
Got it. Yes, and that's exactly
And the resources, energy, and attention move away from it.
And people feel that. They feel
Absolutely.
That's what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an embodied experience for them. It's not an idea. It's not an idea the demographics are changing, I'm gonna have less of the pie. It's an embodied experience of loss and grief and fury. And so that's why we have the situation that we have right now in our culture. It's the absolute homicidal rage about it. And it's about the changing demographics, that's the underlying insecurity, the change in the nature of work and in the nature of family, and even in the nature of community, right? So because of that, and it's everything from the gentrification in cities, for example, displacing people, literally, physically displacing people. And so you can understand, right, how that creates this immense pressure and unhappiness and distress. And they handle it in different ways. We're an individualistic culture, so people tend to take it individualistically. But we're also a tribal culture, and so people come together, and that's the problem.
And Peg, that's so easily manipulatable, right? Because you just tell a red thinking structure, they're taking these jobs away from you, these immigrants.
Yes.
What are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah,
I have the solution,
Well, we have to take it back by force. We have to take back what's, quote, ours, even though it's not anything.
But they can be used as to get, they can be manipulated into voting a certain way because they're so easily triggered.
Well, yeah, they're so easily the rage is, that's sort of the operative modality. So yeah, it's very, very easy and very cynically and directly manipulated. Yeah, and authoritarian rulers have from time immemorial used that tool. So even back in the Buddha's time, the king of a neighboring kingdom sent an emissary to the Buddha. He didn't come himself. He sent an emissary to the Buddha to find out whether he would succeed. He thought of him as sort of a fortune teller. Would he succeed if he attacked the neighboring kingdom? And the Buddha did not speak to him directly. He spoke to Ananda, and he said, Ananda, if a community meets in harmony, discourses in harmony, reveres the elders, disbands in harmony, is there any possibility of overcoming them by military might, basically? And Ananda says, well, certainly not. And the Buddha says, so Ananda. And so this emissary goes back and tells the king, well, he didn't speak to me directly, but I did tell Ananda something I overheard, and he said, he tells the king, if they meet in harmony, if they, discourse in harmony, if they disband in harmony, if they revere the elders, we can't overcome them by might. And here's what the king says, damn it, we're gonna have to use propaganda.
To disharmonize the society.
Yes, even in the Buddha's time, we're just gonna have to depend on propaganda then. That's the only way we can defeat them. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So this is where we are, right? Nothing that's ever been a stream of consciousness in the mind stream has disappeared completely. We still have Hitler in the mind stream. We still have, Martin Luther King Jr. in the mind stream. We still have Gandhi in the mind stream, in the collective mind stream, right? Racism.
Collective mind stream.
Yeah, it's all in the collective mind stream. So then, so this is wonderful. The church is a place to make connections that will advance people's needs. It's a material thing. We want a bigger building. We're going to have a fund drive. It's like that. And we have a thermometer so we can measure the metrics, right, of the fund drive. So, but then there are people who have longing for something else. They long for fellowship, right? They long for connection. They're not really getting it in this way, So the shift then is to green, and to a kind of sort of non-institutional collectives start out that way. Unitarians are like this, very green level values. There's study groups, meetups, practice communities, often without a leader or a priest. We're just going to have a little meditation group and we just get together. And so the democratic organizations with a flat structure where everyone's opinion is equal to everyone else's. This is really important. Consensus is really important to green level values. The focus may be on the environment or social justice or spiritual study broadly defined. An eclectic membership with diverse views, the most important value is community, and people are expected to be willing to sacrifice self-interest to the community, to the ideal of the community. So you're working not to prop up an institutional structure like in blue, but for the welfare of the community. It means everything to us to get together, and that's it. So, and then we want to be inclusive. So now we have then the evolution in green level of programs in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have a real concern that someone might come and then not want to stay. And why is that? Why are people not staying? Will become a concern, Why are people not feeling included, And this kind of obsesses green level thinkers. Why can't we feed everyone? Why can't we house everyone? It's a source of anguish and suffering for green level folks. So yes, we don't have our demographic in Appamada does not match the demographic of our community at large. This is a source of concern and despair sometimes for sanghas, and what I loved what one of the teacher said, African American teacher, and I can't remember who it was who said it exactly. We don't need more diversity in communities. We need more diverse sanghas. That is, we need African-American sanghas, we need, Spanish-speaking sanghas, that's what that teacher expressed as, that's what kind of diversity they were interested in. Not being a token Black person in an all-white sangha, not being, the one Spanish speaker who has to translate everything, they want communities of their own. And that's totally understandable, right? It's just a different mindset. But for green level thinkers, that's really abhorrent, because then they're apart, they're separate, right? They're separate but not equal. I mean, it's like, it's disturbing, right? And the other thing that's really disturbing for green level people is people come who are problematic. They may be openly psychotic. And the green level community is like, we should wrap our arms around these people and hold them and care for them, right? They're drunks. Well, okay, so they're drunk right now, but we're gonna just work around this, because we want them to be included, and there's no sense of, this community is not for that, this is not our function. We are not a residential treatment center for people with severe mental illness. We're not able to do that. We don't have skills for that. We don't have training for that, but that is really hard for green level folks to think. It's just hard for them to think, oh, there might be someone who this isn't appropriate for. Now, my personal opinion is the Dharma is good for everyone, but not everyone wants the Dharma, right? And not everyone is able to make use of the Dharma. They're not there yet. To me, it's an evolutionary thing, right? They're just not there yet. So the next week, the person who's completely drunk gets sober, decides, I need a spiritual practice. Great, they're going to be able to be connected. So, I see we're running over time again. Is this my perennial issue? Okay. Oh, it's 8 o'clock. Oh, this is so bad. Okay, but I feel so bad. I'm just the worst teacher ever. No self-regulation, no sense of time. And this clock on the computer is like this big. I can see that there's ants there, but I have no idea what they're saying. So apologies, if you have to leave, just leave. It's fine. But anyway, this I don't know if this is helpful, thinking about it in these terms. Yellow level, it's even hard to talk a little bit about Sangha because it's so fluid. But our householder Sangha has that yellow element. People come and go at different times, and they're there 1 week and they're not there the next week. Are they in Denmark? Who knows? They don't check in. So there's quite a bit of that. So does that make sense? At turquoise level, everything is resolved. There's no effort in it. There's no striving in it. There's I'm gonna have to tell you this tonight, I guess. Things that I wanted to say about this. I'm not going to talk about this now, but I will, I'll sort of fill in tonight a little bit. We'll have a little bit more time, and I'll be able to, say a little bit more about this. We'll continue.
A cliffhanger.
What?
It's a cliffhanger.
It's a cliffhanger. To be continued, yeah.
What about turquoise?
We do want to hear the rest of
You want to hear about turquoise? You want to hear about cosmic consciousness, I see. Okay, all right. Okay.